As Sean mentioned, I've led the campaign in Madison, Wisconsin, and I've had the chance to go all sorts of different places, and I love to try to help inspire people to make courageous sacrifices by telling about some of the weather that my volunteers would stand out in Madison. But having just been to Canada and now coming to Minnesota, I can't really do that here because you've had it worse than we have. But I always like to say that in the upper Midwest, you know you're an upper Midwest 40 Days for Life participant when you've got your own pair of 40 Days for Life socks. And I'm not talking about socks with a logo on it that says 40 Days for Life. I'm talking about socks that are the biggest, thickest woolen socks that you can find for those very cold days out at the vigil site. But today's obviously day 2. Yesterday was day 1, and I love day 1 because it's day 1 where we kind of take a look and see where are we going to get the first report of a saved baby from. And I believe our first saved baby report came from Tempe, Arizona. And we got a beautiful email from our leader there. Her name is Lisa, and she shared how exciting it was to have this life that was scheduled to be lost on Tuesday, and on Wednesday that child was planning to be welcomed into the world, and what a difference it can make when people take 1 hour to come and stand in prayer. Back in the spring, I think our first saved baby was in Norristown, Pennsylvania. We've got a wonderful leader out in Norristown, and she had been faithfully year after year, 2 campaigns a year, leading this campaign. And in many ways, she was rejected by members of the church. Maybe that's kind of out there to stand in front of an abortion facility. Even there were folks involved in the pro-life community that weren't really sold on what she was up to. But she closed her Planned Parenthood location, and the whole world jumped on the bandwagon in Pennsylvania that year. She saved the first baby of the spring campaign, one of 3 babies that she saved that day alone. And so we give great thanks for that. Back in last year's fall campaign, it was just a very simple story, but one that we hear time and time and time again. It was Orange County, California, and a woman showed up early for her abortion, and the prayer volunteers were there early for the first shift. And as we've heard time and time again, the woman planning her abortion came, she was on her way, she was looking for a way out of the abortion. At 40 Days for Life, we talk a lot about how the women getting abortion aren't pro-choice, they feel they have no choice, and she was looking for a sign. And when she saw that person there humbly standing and praying and witnessing, that was her sign, and she chose life for the first saved baby of that campaign. I know that there's great work being done out here in Minnesota, that you've got great sidewalk counselors, some of the best in the nation, and the world looks up to some of the work that's being done here. And that's great, but if you're not a trained sidewalk counselor, you still have the ability to save a baby. One of my favorite stories from back home in Madison is a family that my wife and I have known since college. Beautiful couple, they've got 5 children, and the mother and all 5 children came out to our vigil site one day, and they closed their hour of prayer by getting down on their knees on the hard concrete and just praying humbly. And as they did, they wound up at an angle where even through the blinds in the window of Planned Parenthood, they were able to kind of see in. And more importantly, the women waiting for their abortions were able to see out. And one woman that was waiting for abortion kept looking out and making eye contact, looking away, looking back, looking away, looking back, looking away. Finally, enough was enough. She darted up, she left Planned Parenthood, she made a beeline for her car, stopping only to look at a little 8-year-old girl and mouth the words, "Thank you." And so it's great that you've got wonderful sidewalk counselors here, but even if you're not, the Lord can save a child through the humble witness and through trust in God. That's all it takes to save a life. Sean mentioned that there have been incredible fruits. We've now seen nearly 9,000 lives saved from abortion. I mean, I don't need to tell you, it's no secret, it's no surprise that we live in a time of great darkness. There are unprecedented attacks, not just on human life, but on marriage and on people of conscience. And the darkness of the culture, frankly, is sick, a diseased culture. But in spite of that, I always look back to my favorite verse in our sacred scripture, John's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 5, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And today, in these next 40 days, we are going to stand as the light of Christ that shines in that darkness. Because every woman that's walking into your abortion facility, she's carrying with her own very deep, very personal darkness. It might be the darkness of a teenage girl that is terrified to go home and tell her parents that she's pregnant. It might be the darkness of a couple that's just received a very difficult and challenging prenatal diagnosis and is being tempted, even pressured to have an abortion. It might be the darkness of the woman who is walking back out through those doors and has quickly found that the promise of relief from a crisis situation was an empty promise. But whatever that darkness is, we enter into it with that light of Christ as a sign of His hope and His healing and His mercy. One of my favorite stories of the campaign is a guy named Dan Miller. If you're on our 40 Days for Life email list, you've probably heard of Dan. If you've read the 40 Days for Life book, you've probably heard of Dan. Dan was at our kickoff in Madison last night. He leads a campaign about 90 minutes from the one that I've been involved in. And Dan is my pro-life hero. He and his team have saved hundreds of babies, literally, these last few years. And a couple summers ago, Dan and I were at a local film studio, and we were doing some recording of some footage for a short pro-life film that we were in the process of producing. As we're getting near the end of the day, we're taking a quick break before we finish up, and Dan's phone rang. And he nervously mentioned something about how, depending on who was on the phone, he might be missing the birth that he was supposed to attend. I thought, my goodness, that's the most curious comment I've heard in a long time. I knew Dan's wife was not expecting. Dan, why in the world are you attending somebody's birth? And he shared with me how a few months earlier at 40 Days for Life, he had met a couple whose baby boy at 20 weeks old had just been diagnosed with a very serious prenatal genetic anomaly called trisomy 18. And the doctors urged this family to have an abortion to spare this child what they said would be a short life of misery and suffering. So this couple went and got a second opinion. They were told to get an abortion. They went for a third opinion. They were told to get an abortion. By the time they met Dan on the sidewalk, they were desperate. They told Dan, we don't have any family around here. We don't have anybody that we can lean on. And Dan looked at them and he said, we're your family now. And he walked them across the street to the pregnancy center where they found a fourth opinion. And they found the doctors, the counselors, the volunteers, and the material support that they would need to get through this very difficult and challenging pregnancy. They chose life. And because it was unclear how long their child would live after birth, they invited Dan to be present, to be able to meet this child whose life he had saved. Fortunately, by the grace of God, Dan made it back home so he could get there, and he was there at the hospital. And it was unclear how long, again, that this baby would live, baby Eric, so it was Dan himself who baptized this child right there in the hospital. And Dan made good on his promise. When baby Eric died after just 6 hours and 14 minutes outside the womb, it was Dan who rallied the pro-life community of southeastern Wisconsin to finance a funeral and burial for this child whose life he had saved. It was Dan and his team who rallied the pro-life community of southeastern Wisconsin to attend that funeral, to console this family, grieving the loss of their son, who I'm convinced has made a bigger impact on our world in just 6 hours than many people will in 80 or 100 years on this earth. Those doctors were right about one thing. Baby Eric's life was short, but it was anything but filled with misery and suffering. It was an occasion of joy and continues to be a source of joy for his parents, for their family, and for all who had the opportunity to meet this child in his short life. And it makes me reflect on the crisis of abortion that we have, right? There's many manifestations of it, but I don't think this crisis is ultimately one that's about public policy or about politics. Those things are important, but this crisis at its root is one of despair, of hopelessness. What is it saying when we look at a woman in crisis and say, there is no hope for you, the best we can do is take your money and take the life of your child? You're a dramatic and powerful sign of contradiction to that. And over these 40 days, you are going to inspire more women than you know to choose life, and we don't even know what the other fruits will be. As I wind down, there's a particular story that's really been on my heart of late. It's a story about a young Austrian Jewish doctor named Viktor Frankl, who was liberated from the concentration camps in Auschwitz shortly before the end of the Second World War. And when he was liberated from that camp, he emerged to find out that the Nazi Holocaust had taken the life of his father, of his mother, of his brother, and of his beautiful, beloved bride. At this point, nobody would have blamed Dr. Frankl had he abandoned hope and turned his back on hope, right? Nobody would have blamed him had he spent the rest of his life filled with bitterness and anger, despair, even hatred. But that's not what he did. Instead, he wrote a book that extolled the dignity of human life even amidst unimaginable suffering. A book that he closed with the following words: "We have come to know man as he is. After all, man is that being who built the gas chambers in Auschwitz. But man is also that being who entered into those chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer or the Shema Yisrael on his lips." I want to be clear that I share this story not because I want to compare the atrocities of one generation to the atrocities of our generation. I share that story because I believe that Dr. Frankl's powerful words illustrate the type of hope that our world needs today, the type of hope that this city needs today, the type of hope that you are bringing to this community through your presence out here in front of the abortion facility. 70 years later, we have once again come to know man as he is. Man is that being who built the chemical and surgical abortion facility, but he is also that man who, with nothing more than a prayer on your lips, is coming to bring the light of Christ to a place of great darkness. So I want to challenge each of you to do two things, just two things, this campaign. The first thing that I want to urge you to do is think about how many hours you would be comfortable standing out here at this vigil. What would you feel safe with? What would you feel comfortable with? And I ask you to then take one or two steps beyond that. Step outside your comfort zone and stretch yourself. I think when we give all we've got, when we give one last little bit of effort beyond what we thought we could do, I think the Lord honors that and responds to those sacrifices in a very powerful way. The second thing I want to urge you to do, if necessary, I've never met a 40 Days for Life leader all over North America who has said that he or she had enough volunteers to end abortion in the community. Brian, if you have enough volunteers, I'll stop right now, but are you hoping to have more volunteers?
Until eternity.
All right. We always need to be bringing new people in. There are people who have participated in pro-life efforts in the past, and their life situation maybe requires them to take a step back. We always need more people in this movement. And I wish that I could tell you all to go download an app that would bring forth all the volunteers that you need, but even in this technological world, it doesn't quite work that way. People come out here when they're invited. I came out when I was invited. I've got friends who come out when they're invited. We need to be inviting others, and I ask each of you to think about your pro-life friends, your family members, your coworkers, your neighbors, the people that you go to school with, everybody that you know that's pro-life. Think about them and ask them to come and join you out here. That first time, it's never easy, is it? So offer to go with them the first time if that's what they need. But you know what we find? We never find the people who come out here once say, you know what, that's enough for me, I didn't like that, I'm not coming back. They continue to come back and to pray and to pray and to pray and to bring hope to this community. So I ask you to invite others to come with you, and I'm sure that they will continue to participate. At the end of the day, you're really all that's standing in between the abortion industry and scared, frightened women who are not pro-choice. They feel they have no choice. You're the only thing standing in between the abortion industry and couples like that who almost chose abortion before Dan Miller intervened. You're the only thing standing in between the abortion industry and the heartache of post-abortive women and men. So I ask you to fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith, and continue to bring the light of Christ to this place that is so desperately in need of it. God bless you and have a great campaign.